From sacred scarabs to Earth's mightiest insect, here are 14 amazing true facts about dung beetles. 14. Meet the beetles. There are more than 5,000 species of dung beetles that belong to a superfamily that comprises about 35,000 species, and approximately 200 new species are described every year. Also called tumblebugs, they tend to show up in all manner of colors, shapes, and sizes, and there are high degrees of variability in terms of the leg length and body mass. As you'll shortly find out, there are species that include a beetle that might be the world's mightiest animal. Some can roll balls of poo as big as an apple, and you can find them pretty much all over the world, except for Antarctica. They show up in habitats ranging from scorching deserts, farmlands, and planted forests. And while most of them are known to feed on dung, some species have an appetite for decaying leaves and mushrooms. In fact, one type from South America is actually carnivorous and feeds on millipedes. But the majority that prefer dung do not have to worry about eating or drinking anything else. And that's because the excrement provides the critters with all the nutrients they need. And that is the straight poop. 13. Cool balls of dung. Dung beetles can live in hot, arid climates, meaning that the ground gets hot and the feet can start to burn. Now, in order to combat this, the insects have been observed to stop rolling the dung ball around noontime, like they're taking a break. They climb on top of the ball in order to let the feet cool off from all their trekking. Experts say that the dung balls retain moisture, making them significantly cooler than the surrounding environment. 12. That's how they roll. Why do dung beetles roll those balls of poo anyway? Well, not all of them do that, as you'll learn, but it serves a primary use as a food source or for a breeding chamber. Now, the ones that do roll are known, oddly enough, as rollers, which is one of three types. The other two are the tunnelers. They will burrow down into and underneath the ball of dung and will bury it as a larder or a place to store food. The third type is known as the dwellers, which kind of sounds like a Stephen King title. Nonetheless, they do not engage in digging or rolling duties. They simply live to raise the offspring within the dung. Which type do you think has the best gig? Which gig would you prefer? 11. Manure moms and dung daddies. Another reason for dung beetles rolling dung away is to feed the offspring. When the baby beetles come into the world, they'll never go hungry, and they won't necessarily have to leave the safety of the nest. And that's because the mother deposits each individual egg into its own small casing, which of course is formed out of dung. In fact, it's the mother beetle who assumes child-rearing duties, including constructing the nest and making sure it's well stocked with food. There are some species where both parents share child care duties and join forces to dig the nests. And there are even certain species of dung beetles that are known to mate for life. In fact, experts tell us that these critters are among the very few insects that demonstrate a measure of parental care for the young. 10. Straight on. When pushing a pile of poo, the dung beetle uses its head and its back legs, typically traveling in a straight line. Now, there is a logical reason for this. Because there is a free-for-all frenzy among the insects in obtaining the scat, it is best to grab the prize and then make a dash for it. If the insect happens to push the ball into an inadvertent curve, it could wind up back in the thick of all that chaos, and a bigger, badder beetle might steal that dung ball. So in the case of these critters, the shortest distance between 2 points is most definitely a straight line. 9. Brooding balls. When these beetles roll the balls of dung for purposes of reproduction, that sphere is identified as a brooding ball. The male will usually roll the ball while the female follows behind or hitches a ride. There are some cases where both of them will roll the ball together. Once a soft spot in the soil is located, the ball is buried, and the two insects mate underground. Now, afterwards, the brooding ball is formed, and the female lays her eggs inside of it. And as we note, each egg is placed in a chamber provided with food for the brood, a type of parental behavior called mass provisioning. 8. Dung Diet. Have you ever heard of coprophagous insects? Well, those are insects that survive on the excrement of other larger animals. Well, dung beetles do fall into that category, of course, although they are particular about the feces upon which they feast. While not all dung beetles have a diet made up exclusively of poop, they do all consume feces at some point in their lives. The droppings of herbivores seem to be the most favored because it consists mostly of undigested plant material. That's as opposed to the leavings of carnivores, which contain very little nutritional value for the dung beetles. Experts say the insects might actually prefer overall the droppings of omnivores, which have nutritional value and the odor makes them easy to locate. 7. The nose. So maybe it should go without saying that dung beetles are exceptionally talented at locating dung, and that is thanks to their sensitive sense of smell. From the insect's point of view, freshness counts, and that's because dung piles will lose the moistness and dry out fairly quickly, making it far less desirable to the palate. Experts have recounted stories where 4,000 beetles swarmed over some elephant poo less than 15 minutes after it was deposited. Now, that initial swarm was joined by another 12,000 insects, so that's a lot of competition. And time is always of the essence where fresh dung is concerned. Now, that also holds true for dung beetles that do not follow the nose, per se. Those individuals will hitch a ride on the animals whose feces they covered. When that animal voids its bowels, the beetle will hop down and proceed to dig in. And for the record, these critters do not have noses. They actually do their smelling with their antennae. 6. Old school style. These critters are thought to have evolved more than 60 million years ago, although we did find some sources claiming they were even older than that. Tell you what, let's agree that dung beetles have been around for quite a while, and way back in the prehistoric day, they were serving pretty much the same function as they do today, except that they were feasting on the dung of truly massive animals like Glyptodon, a huge armadillo-like critter about the size of a small car, and giant ground sloths like Megatherium, which could weigh up to 4 tons and measure some 20 feet long. Paleontologists have found dung balls as large as tennis balls that date back tens of millions of years, and that must have made for some monster cleanup duty. 5. Fussy eaters. Now, when it comes to excrement, not just any poo will do. Dung beetles can effectively specialize in eating the droppings of certain types of animals while ignoring the leavings of other types. An extreme example of this occurred in Australia in the 1960s. Dung beetles indigenous to Oz had evolved alongside marsupials like kangaroos and wombats and had developed an affinity for those droppings. When cattle was introduced down under in the late 19th century, though, the majority of native beetles ignored the bovine waste, and as a result, the cow pats, or patties, or cow pies for that matter, began to pile up in the outback where it could take months or even years to decompose. As pastures became rank, cows would not feed there, and the dung provided breeding ground for parasitic worms and pestilent flies. Eventually, species of foreign dung beetles. 4. Holy rollers. The scarab is a sacred creature found in many paintings and jewelry from ancient Egypt. Did you know that scarabs were in fact several species of dung beetles, the most famous of which, appropriately enough, is commonly known as the sacred scarab? It was linked to Khepri, known as the god of the rising sun. The ancient belief held that all scarabs were male and reproduced by impregnating a dung ball. Now, that mistaken belief of self-creation reflected the self-creation of Khepri, who is said to create himself out of nothing. The scarab's image is omnipresent in the religious and funerary art of ancient Egypt and represents the ideals of transformation and resurrection. The ball of dung represented the earth, and the scarab beetle represented the sun. 3. Dividends from the dung. Even though rolling that ball of poop might not appear so important, dung beetles do play a vital role in maintaining tropical forests and in agriculture. Soil structure and nutrient recycling is improved when the insects bury and consume dung. They also play a role in dispersing the seeds contained in the animal's waste, which can influence seed burial within tropical forests. And by removing dung, they play a vital role in protecting livestock, including cattle, as we noted in that story from Australia in the 60s. Now, if not removed, that dung can attract pests like flies. Did you know that a cow can drop up to 12 pats each day, and one pat can produce about 3,000 flies within 2 weeks? In Texas, experts say that the beetles bury more than 75% of cattle dung. Now, in light of all that, it's not too surprising to learn that the insects are often used in ecological research as a way to monitor the impact of human activities on how ecosystems function and on tropical biodiversity. 2. Stars in their eyes. Now, what do humans and dung beetles have in common? Well, no doubt, you could come up with many clever rejoinders to that one. So, let's cut to the chase. Aside from human beings, dung beetles are the only creatures known to orient themselves and navigate using the Milky Way as a guide. Experts observed a species of African dung beetles standing atop the spheres of dung in order to orient themselves when the Milky Way's clusters of bright stars were visible in the sky. Experiments show that if the critters could not see the skies, they would simply wander about aimlessly. So, whenever an obstacle is encountered, like a rock or a depression in the ground, the critter stops, then climbs on top of the sphere to seek directional guidance from the heavens. 1. Small but mighty. They might appear tiny, but some species of dung beetles are surprisingly powerful. They're able to roll a dung ball that's up to 10 times the weight and are known to bury dung that's 250 times heavier than itself in a single night. Male specimens exhibit great strength not only in pushing the dung balls, but in fending off competitors for mates. One species is known to pull more than 1,100 times their own body weight, and that is roughly equivalent to a human being moving a couple of double-decker buses that are each filled with people. How about that? According to some experts, that serves to make this species not only the world's strongest insect, but Earth's mightiest animal as well. Sign them up for the Avengers.